This is Rabbi Henry, and I'm doing something for the first time I've never done before. I'm doing a live stream. I guess it's called a podcast. I'm a little bit new at this, so there are going to be some mess ups. I'm in my office at my congregation, and I wanted to share with you some things that are very important. I covered these things at a conference that I had with a number of pastors who came, helping them understand the importance and the significance of Passover and the fulfillment of Yeshua as our Passover lamb, according to the book of Corinthians, chapter 5, and the one who was risen from the dead as our first fruits resurrection in Corinthians 15, and a number of other passages as well. Bear with me as I probably messed this whole thing up. I'm going to try not to take too much of your time. Usually I do this in a blog, but I decided to try something new. We'll give it a shot. And you know what they say, if at first you don't succeed, you're about average. All right, so let's get started. We're going to be talking about what is known as the Aviv barley, and in reference to the first fruits. So turn with me in the book of Leviticus 23:5, verse 5 through 6. It says, "In the first month, on the 14th day of the first month, at twilight is the Lord's Passover." I'll explain twilight in a minute, what that means. "And on the 15th day of the same month is the feast of unleavened bread. To the Lord, for 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread." In Leviticus 23, we see that we have the biblical feasts. There are 7 biblical feasts there. Passover is one of them. And at this time, we're going to be talking totally about Passover. I think Michelle Lamont, I see her on there. I don't know if I'm doing this right. I'm going to try and record this as well so I can show this later on. Hi, Michelle, if you see me. I think I got this right. During the spring, let's get back to this, right before Passover, the barley crop, and of course in the springtime, barley is the first crop that comes in Israel, and then the wheat, and then in the fall we have the fruit. During the spring, right before the Passover, the barley crop comes to a place in its growth where it is declared what is known as Aviv. This means that the barley was in the head, but not quite ripe enough to eat. And as soon as the barley was in the Aviv, the children of Israel were instructed to look for what's known as the sliver of the new moon. In the Hebrew, we call that the Rosh Chodesh. At the sighting of the new moon, we were to declare the first of the month. It's a lunar calendar, according to the Jewish biblical calendar. It's not a traditional solar Gregorian calendar. And so they go by the sliver of what is known as the new moon, and that's when the month is beginning. At that point, we count 14 days, and then we begin the holy day of Pesach, or Passover, and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. After that, the Feast of First Fruits. These 3 feasts run together in the season. We have Passover, we have unleavened bread, which we have to eat unleavened bread for 7 days, no chametz or no leaven, and then we have the first fruits. We'll talk about that more in a second. It was during this time between the Aviv barley and the sighting of the new moon and the 14th of the month that the barley continued to ripen. So what we have here is we see the barley, it's ripe in its head, but it's not quite ripe enough to eat, like a piece of corn that would be considered hard, a piece of corn that would be white instead of yellow. So it's in the head, and it's during that time, between that time and the sighting of the new moon and the 14th of the month, which is 14 days later, of course, when Passover comes, that the barley continues to ripen so that it could be harvested. Once it's harvested, the children of Israel are instructed to make an offering of that barley in gratitude before the Lord. They were not allowed to eat of the new crop before they made this offering. So that basically means you had to offer this barley in gratitude before the Lord before you could even partake of any of that new crop. Okay, bear with me 1 second as I pull down some of my notes. I'm doing this with notes because I do mess up in front of a camera. If I'm doing this live, it's a little easier because then I go off. All right. They were not allowed to eat of the new crop before they made the offering. The observance was carried out in this manner. When the standing, ripe spring harvest of barley was ready to be reaped, the celebrant would take 1 sheaf from the standing harvest and bring it to the priest. The lone sheaf was called the sheaf of first fruits. The priest was then to take this 1 sheaf and wave it before the Lord in his house. This was done the day after the normal weekly Shabbat, which occurred after the first day of Passover. The prescribed offerings are also presented along with the sheaf. So there was the Passover, which is known as a Shabbaton. Whatever the day of the week this Passover falls on is considered a high Sabbath, and no servile work can be done. And then there's the weekly Sabbath, and this weekly Sabbath is the Sabbath that begins Friday night at sundown till Saturday night. So after the Passover, as soon as the Passover is over, then we bring our offering of the sheaf of first fruits, our first spring harvest. And I'm trying to not allow the sun to wash up my face too much. I know I look a little pasty right now, but I can't help it because I got a window right behind me, and I've covered as much as I can. So they were to take this barley and wave it in the form of a sheaf offering before the Lord, because they couldn't eat of any of the new barley until they actually gave praise and thanks to the Lord for that first offering of barley. All right. I'm going to pull my notes down. All right. So now we call this the Aviv barley. There are, of course, 12 months in the year in the Hebrew calendar, and biblically, none of them have names. The only one that has a name is called the month of Aviv. And we'll talk about what that means in a second. The rest of the months are just numbered. They have numbers, just like the days of the week. The days of the week are, except for the Shabbat, you have Yom Echad, Shtai, Shalosh. We have the Hebrew months, which are numbered. But the only day that has a name is called Sabbath or Shabbat. And I see some other people out there, Randy Shaw, Matthew Heine. Boy, this is kind of cool. I like this. And that's very cool. I didn't know this worked like this. I'm discovering new things. All right, wonderful. So Aviv appears in 6 verses in the Torah, the word Aviv, and I'll be explaining what that means in a minute. So one of them is found in Exodus chapter 9, verse 31, and it says, "And the flax and the barley was smitten." This is as they're getting ready to leave Egypt. This is when the plague of hail comes down, and it says, "The flax and the barley were smitten, for the barley was in the ear, and the flax was bold." All right, so that means that the flax was in the pod, but not quite totally ripe as well, and that the barley was in the ear, but it's Aviv. It's not exactly quite ripe to eat also. And they were smitten because they weren't totally mature. So that means they came out of Egypt during the time of the spring, because we always know that during the spring things blossom and things bud. You know when the seasons are changing based upon the crops. Now in Massachusetts, it's not always so, because it seems to snow whenever it wants to. And then we could have an April and a May snowstorm and really freak everything out. But in Israel, it's the case anyways. So the scripture, the version or the translation in the scripture was in the head for barley and was in the bud for the flax. This implies that the Aviv is a stage of agricultural development. That Aviv literally has to do with pointing out that the barley is in this stage of agricultural development. That's also, you'll see that found in Strong's 1392, the word describing the flax defined as bold, which also means that it's in the pod or the capsule of the plant. It's not quite ripe. So let me see if I can get this to go down without losing my notes again. Very good. All right. And also, this means that it's talking about the agricultural stage and the development of the 2 crops. So Exodus 13:4, "This day you came out in the month of Aviv." Okay, here we go right there. Exodus 23:15, "You shall keep the feast of unleavened bread. You shall eat unleavened bread." That's Exodus 23:15. 7 days as I commanded you in the time appointed of the month of Aviv. For in it you came out of Egypt. So they came out in the spring. They came out when the barley was ripe, but not quite ripe to eat. It says, "And none of you shall appear before me empty." All right. In the Hebrew, "in the time appointed of the month of Aviv" comes from a 3-word phrase, Moed Chodesh Aviv. Moed Chodesh Aviv. In the month of Aviv, and it's called a Moed. The word Moed comes from the concept of Leviticus 23, Moedim, the appointed times and seasons. These are appointments. They're appointments that were kept by the nation of Israel. They must be there. I say this to my congregation all the time. When the Lord said to the children of Israel, "I'm going to bring the angel of death," you make sure you're under the blood. You make sure you're covered by the blood of the Lamb. you didn't go around saying to the Lord, look, I got a couple of Shlemiel Egyptians I want to sell some swamp property to. I'll be a little bit late. Hold the angel of death. I'm coming. When the Lord said be under the blood, you were under the blood. You didn't mess around. Plain and simple. It was his appointed time. All right. Time appointed in the month of... All right. Moed Chodesh Aviv. All right. The month of Aviv is called a Moed. Exodus 34:18. The Feast of Unleavened Bread you shall keep. Okay. And I see Joseph J. Cavallero. Good to see. Good to see you, Joe. Again, I'm still learning how to work this. I will mess up until I get comfortable. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread as I commanded you in the time of the month of Aviv. For in the month of Aviv you came out of Egypt. In Hebrew, the time, the month of Aviv, comes from the same three-word phrase. And that phrase, again, is Moed Chodesh Aviv. Leviticus 2:14, and if you offer a meat offering of your first fruits unto the Lord, you shall offer for the meat offering of your first fruit green ears of corn, dried, and that's not really a good translation. It should be barley, dried by a fire, even corn, barley beaten out of full ears. In order to eat it, if you wanted to eat it before it was ripe, you would have to roast it and then break it open, of course. The King James Version supplies the word corn as part of the translations, but the Scripture version says green heads of grain, and which literally means it's talking about the barley. Deuteronomy 16:1, observe the month of Aviv and keep the Passover unto the Lord, for in the month of Aviv, the Lord your Elohim, in Hebrew it says the Lord your God, but it's translated out Yehovah your Elohim, brought you forth out of Egypt by night. I'm going to flip down here. All right, now, had the word been translated into English instead of transliterated, and the difference between transliteration and translation is simply this. Transliteration means they take the Hebrew and they take the Hebrew consonants and put it now into English consonants. Translation is a literal translation. If I say the word Abba, it means father. I don't write it in English consonants. So, had the word Aviv been translated into English instead of transliterated, the Hebrew word Aviv would have actually been translated like this. Let me read these verses in the translation. So, Exodus 13:4. This day you came out in the month of the fresh young ears of barley. Isn't that cool? Exodus 23:15. You shall keep the feast of unleavened bread. You shall eat unleavened bread 7 days as I command you in the time appointed, the Moed, the appointed times and seasons, of the month of the fresh young ears of barley, for in it you came out of Egypt, and none shall appear before me empty. Exodus 34:18. The feast of unleavened bread you shall keep 7 days. You shall eat unleavened bread as I commanded you in the time, the Moed, of the month of the fresh young ears of barley, for in the month of the fresh young ears of barley you came out of Egypt. Deuteronomy 16:1. Observe, and this is in the Hebrew, it's a direct command, by the way, the month of the fresh young ears of barley, and keep the Passover unto the Lord, your Elohim, Yehovah your Elohim, for in the month of the fresh young ears of barley, the Lord your God, Yehovah your Elohim, brought you forth out of Egypt by night. And the rest of them also go like that. Now, Israel was very familiar with the concept of first fruits. First fruits is not something that is foreign to them. These aren't concepts that he's just pulling out of a hat. The first fruits were always the choicest and the foremost, the first, the best, the preeminent of all that was to follow. They were holy to the Lord. The concept of first fruits or the firstborn is a major theme in the Bible. This can be seen by a number of scriptures. For example, Exodus 23:16 and 19. I'm giving you a chance to write that down. 34:26, Exodus again. Leviticus 2:12 through 14. Leviticus 23:20. Numbers 18:12 through 15. Deuteronomy, that's 18:12 through 15. 18:1 through 5. Deuteronomy still. 26, 2 through 4. Verse 10, and also 10. 2 Chronicles 31:5. Nehemiah 10:35 through 39. Proverbs 3:9. Jeremiah 2:3. Ezekiel 44:30. 48:14. Malachi 3, 8 through 14, in Hebrews 6, 20, and 7, 1 through 8. All right, so hopefully you got that. If not, you can hopefully roll this back if they allow you that opportunity. Everything on earth, both man and beast, were to be presented before the Lord as a first fruits to him. You remember the Lord redeemed the first of all of the sons of Israel when he killed all of the firstborn of Egypt. The firstborn of both man and beast were sanctified, made holy, and presented. Also, just so you'll remember as an aside, remember that the Levites were a tribe that were not given a parcel of land like the other tribes, and they were to be the ones who were to redeem the firstborn of Israel in the custom known as the Pidyon Haben, the redemption of the firstborn, and you could pay the price and come and have your firstborn redeemed, and they would fulfill the role of the firstborn. David Barker, good to see you. David Falk and Corinne, hi, good to see you too. This is really kind of cool. And of course, Michelle says hello to Corinne. All right, boy, technology is amazing. So everything was to be presented before the Lord as first fruits. The firstborn of both man and beast were sanctified, made holy, and presented to the Lord. Remember that when the angel of death came, it wasn't just the firstborn of the children of Israel, their human sons. It was all the firstborn of every creature, okay? Firstborn of both man and beast were sanctified and presented to the Lord. Exodus 13:2, 22:29. My phone is ringing, but I'm not going to answer it. I'll answer it later. The first fruits of all the earth were presented to the Lord at his altar in praise and thanksgiving. Let me kill this right there. Deuteronomy 26, 1 through 11. So you have plenty of scriptures to show you that these are concepts that were very, very articulated, well articulated in the scripture. Now, Yeshua, the Messiah, his entire life was one of first fruits as well. Yeshua is the firstborn of Miriam, Matthew 1, 23 through 25. Yeshua is the first begotten of the Father, Hebrews 1, 6. Yeshua is the firstborn of every creature, Colossians 1:15. Yeshua is the first begotten from the dead, Revelation 1 through 5. Oh, no, I'm sorry, Revelation 1:5. Yeshua is the firstborn of many brethren, Romans 8:29. Yeshua is the first fruits of the resurrected ones, 1 Corinthians 15, 20 through 23. Yeshua is the beginning of the creation of Elohim, Revelation 14. I'll get this right eventually. Revelation 3:14. Yeshua is the preeminent one, Colossians 1:18. All right, let me move this down. His entire life and death was wrapped up in the idea that he was the one to fulfill first fruits. The Lord doesn't just throw out these holidays, or I call them holy days, as make do keep busy things for the Jews. They're always in trouble. Give them something to do. It'll stay out of trouble. It's good, I'm telling you. Hi, Ken McNeil. Good to see you. But he gives them these things as prototypes, as foreshadows, as forerunners, as mnemonics, as remembrances. In the Hebrew, we use the word zicharon, to remember. So all of these things are to point to the Messiah. And this is why it's so disheartening when we see people throw these things to the ground and dismiss them as if they're worthless. They're not worthless. This is our apologetic. We have an apologetic to defend our faith as believers because of these wonderful prophetic displays. Okay. So now, let me get back where I was. He is, of course, very familiar with these things. He is the one who fulfills all things that have to do with first fruits. His entire life and death are wrapped up in the idea that he is the first one. All right. Now, the 15th of Aviv, which, again, stop thinking in a Gregorian calendar. I'm just going to give you these dates. I'm not even going to make a comparison, or I'm not going to put them alongside of a Gregorian calendar. So I'm just going to talk about a Hebrew calendar. The 15th of Aviv begins what's known as Hag HaMatzah. Remember, we couldn't eat of the first crop until we made an offering to the Lord. And that offering always happened the day after the weekly Sabbath that preceded the Passover. So you had Passover, and then you had the weekly Sabbath, and then after the weekly Sabbath, you had the holy day of Hag HaMatzah. For 7 days we ate matzah. That meant bread without leaven. And of course, for those of you who have eaten 7 days of matzah, you know how tough that can be at the end of 7 days. Yeah. All right, then you want a nice piece of rye bread at that with a smear of cream cheese. All right, so the 15th begins the time when we eat matzah, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is considered a high Sabbath. No work can be done, no servile work. The high Sabbath is called a Shabbaton. There are events in the Hebrew calendar known as Shabbatons, like Yom Kippur. No work can be done whatsoever. The Shabbaton for Passover, you can only do the work that pertains to the holiday, no other work. This is where many people get confused in reference to the Passover, and they think that Yeshua died on a Friday because it says he died on the Sabbath. It's not the weekly Sabbath. It's the Sabbath of the high holiday, the Shabbaton. We'll talk about that later. It did not matter what day of the week it fell on. The Feast of Unleavened Bread is a 7-day feast of the Lord. The day following the weekly Sabbath during Passover, the day after the weekly Sabbath, is called the Feast of First Fruits, Leviticus 23, 10 through 11. Please write these down for later. You might want to read them. They're important. And I'll be reading in Leviticus 23, 9 through 14. All right, you can do that too. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, "Speak to the sons of Israel and say to them, when you enter the land which I am going to give to you and reap its harvest, then you shall bring in a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest." There it is. That's what I was talking about earlier. "To the priest, and he shall wave the sheaf before the Lord for you to be accepted on the day after the weekly Sabbath." It's a weekly Sabbath, not the Shabbaton or the special Sabbath of the Passover. The priest shall wave it. Now, on the day when you wave the sheaf, you shall offer a male lamb. And he goes on to, of course, all the different offerings that need to be done that day. Now, this is significant because if Yeshua is raised from the dead as the first fruit of all those who will eventually be resurrected, he must not miss the prophetic appointment of that day. And that's what has to become preeminent in our minds. These are appointments. They're literally Moedim. They're called appointments, appointed times and seasons that could only be kept by the Messiah himself. If he doesn't keep them, who does? And this is where so many, and I love you, my brothers and sisters, and I'm not judging you. I'm going to just make sure that you understand this is not a salvific issue. No one is telling you you're going to be committed to the fiery furnace. God's going to burn you in the fiery furnace. That's not what I'm saying. I'm going to emphasize that throughout the rest of this time. It is about a memorial that we pay to the Lord, and it's about a remembrance. Every year we celebrate the 4th of July in remembrance. And no one says, I'm sick of this 4th of July, fireworks and barbecues. I'm done with this. No, we celebrate to give glory to the Lord, to remember and to pass to the next generation, just as the book of Deuteronomy teaches us. These things you shall teach your children when you sit, when you walk, when you rise in the way. Why? Because if you don't, the next generation forgets, and then the things of the gospel become horribly polluted. It's about remembrance, zicharon. It's about memorial. It's about celebrating. It's about being grateful. So if Yeshua is raised from the dead as the first fruits of all those resurrected, he must not miss the prophetic appointment of the day. This simply means the death and burial had to happen during the Passover. According to the book of Corinthians, chapter 5, Yeshua, our Passover lamb, is sacrificed for us. He didn't just pull this out of a hat. He understands all. Rav Shaul, the Apostle Paul, he's an expert in the law. He knows. He talks about his credentials. He's of the seed of Abraham. He's from the tribe of Benjamin, circumcised in the 8th day, exceeding in his Judaism beyond his peers. He knows all about this. So he's pulling this out of Tanakh. The only scriptures they had in that day was Tanakh. He couldn't go out and buy a pocket scroll, a New Testament pocket scroll. I'm going to go to the basic Bible bookstore and get myself a pocket Torah, pocket scroll. They didn't have them. The only scriptures they had were the scriptures that Rav Shaul, the Apostle Paul, talks about to Timothy when he says, you've known the scriptures which are able to make you wise into salvation. He's talking about the Torah. He's the first 5 books of Moses. He's talking about the Navim, the prophets. He's talking about the Ketubim and the historical books, the books of narrative. So this means the death, burial, and resurrection had to happen during Passover, and the resurrection has to happen on first fruits. Yeshua needed to die before sundown on the 9th hour on Passover and raise 3 full days and 3 full nights later, according to the biblical calendar, on first fruits. You get what I'm saying? You get my drift? Matthew 27. So this is where he's been crucified. Hi, Tiffany Ambrose. Good to see you. Now, from the 6th hour, darkness fell upon the land until the 9th hour. In the 9th hour, of course, we're talking in a Hebrew understanding, it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. About the 9th hour, Yeshua cries out with a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. Okay, now, when he cries that, why, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? He's actually quoting from Psalm 22, and a lot of people don't understand why he's doing this, and they come up with many different theories and theologies. The reason predominantly why he's crying this is because he's quoting from Psalm 22, the passage, the psalm that specifically speaks about the crucifixion in 1,000 years BC, written by David, and it has specific detail about all the things that are done to him. So it'll point back to him as the Messiah of Israel, and maybe they'll go back and read it and go, "Oi, he was the Messiah." It's amazing. So, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And again, it'll point them back to that passage. And some of those who were standing there, when they heard it, they began saying, "This man is calling for Elijah, Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet, who was prophesied to come before Messiah." Immediately, one of them ran, and that was my commentary, and taking a sponge, filled it with sour wine and put it on a reed and gave him to drink, which is also prophesied in Psalm 22. But the rest of them said, "Let us see whether Elijah will come and save him." And Yeshua cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. So when does he die? He dies shortly thereafter, the 9th hour. The 9th hour is 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So if he dies on the 9th hour and he raises 3 days and 3 nights later, it's got to be 72 hours. Now, there is a theology, and I think it's as we say in Yiddish, Baba Maitza. It's grandmother's tales. That whatever part of the day he occupies is considered or reconciled as a whole day. I don't see that scripturally anywhere. Scripture says in Genesis, an evening and the morning were the first day. The day is from sundown to sundown. That's how the Jewish calendar reconciles a day. Understand that. So it's a totally different concept. Stop thinking 12 o'clock midnight or when the sun rises. This is not when the day begins. At sundown, it's a totally new day, and it's the month of Aviv. So he dies on the 14th of Aviv, 14 days after the Rosh Chodesh, the sliver of the new moon that we saw. We saw the Aviv barley. The barley was ripe. We knew it's spring. We knew spring's coming. Then we look for the sliver of the new moon. Then we know that's the beginning of the new moon. Hi, Vinny Lambert. Good to see you again, or at least your name. I'm blessed to know you are Rabbi. I'm blessed to know you're Vinny. And so we see the sliver of the new moon, and then once we see the sliver of the new moon, then we count 10 days. I forgot to tell you that, and we choose the lamb to be investigated in our house so that we can slaughter the lamb on the 14th of Aviv, which is the day that he's crucified. He's crucified exactly at the time when the Passover lambs are crucified, so that he can fulfill the appointed time and season. And then when the sun goes down, of course, they have to have him in the tomb before the sun goes down. So when the days of unleavened bread, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and the holiday of Passover, mind you, the first night is called Passover, and then 7 days is also unleavened bread. But the first night of Passover and unleavened bread run concurrent the same night, only for one night. They run concurrent. The rest of the time, it's not Passover, it's the Feast of Unleavened Bread for 7 days, okay? So they have to eat the Passover lamb in that evening. If there's anything, the scripture is very clear. If there's anything left over, they must burn it. They can't leave it until the morning. If their house is too small to eat a Passover lamb, they must share it with a house beside them, with their neighbor, and they eat together and they enjoy the Passover meal together. They need to eat it with their loins girded, which means they take their robes, they take the front, pull it to the back. They take the back, pull it to the front, they tie it around, and they make a knot, and so they're ready to run and get out of there, get out of Egypt. You can't do it when you got a robe on and you're walking like Morticia from the Addams family. So they pull up, gird their loins, their staff is in their hand, their sandals are in their feet. They eat it with bitter herbs, and they eat it with unleavened bread, and they're ready to go, and they're ready to get out of there. And that's the night Yeshua is crucified, the night when the Passover lambs are slaughtered. That's when he dies. And if he doesn't die then he's missed the appointment and he can't qualify to be the Passover lamb. Sorry. That's the way it is. 3 days and 3 nights later, he rises. Now, this is going to be hard for somebody to listen to. I don't understand how churches all over the world will quote these passages and say, Yeshua died and rose 3 days and 3 nights later, and yet celebrate on a Friday, saying that he died on a Friday night, Friday afternoon, and rose on a Sunday morning. That's a day and a half. That does not fulfill 3 days and 3 nights. And if Yeshua lied, that's one thing, which he didn't. But if he's telling the truth, then he cannot die on a Friday and raise on a Sunday morning. And nowhere, and I challenge anyone to show me where it says he rose on Sunday morning. The first day of the week begins at sundown on Saturday evening. That's the problem. They don't understand how that works. He does not rise on a Sunday morning. He's risen. And we'll talk about that more later because I'll be doing another podcast. Now, here's the thing. He has to die according to this schedule on a Wednesday evening because we do reverse math. Because remember that Yom HaBikurim, or first fruits, is the day after the weekly Sabbath, immediately after the Passover, which would be Saturday evening after the sundown. So he rises right before the sun sets to show he's the Lord of the Sabbath. And he rises before Yom HaBikurim, first fruits, to show that he's the first fruits resurrected from the dead, so that he can fulfill both appointed times and seasons. Lord of the Sabbath, Lord, and of course we talk about this in Corinthians 15, which we'll talk about later. He rises from the dead on Yom HaBikurim, on first fruits. So he says, okay, so they give him a sponge to drink with sour wine, which is prophesied in, also in Psalm 22. Now, this is also found in Mark 15, 33 through 39, and in Luke 23, 44 through 49. I'm sorry. You can tell I get off my notes quite a bit because I rant. All right, let's move down. In 1 Corinthians 15, it says, for as in Adam, because Adam is the one who's, Adam and Eve messed up everything, so also the all die, so also in Moshiach all will be made alive, but each in his own order. Okay? Moshiach, the first fruits. Again, where do you think we get that language? Paul is not pulling it out of a hat. Watch me pull a scripture out of my hat. He is bringing this out of the whole understanding of what first fruits is. He knows it well. After that, those who are Moshiachs at his first coming. Remember, we couldn't eat of the crop of the barley until we made an offering. So just as the offering of the barley is brought before the Lord, and now we can eat of the crop, Yeshua is raised from the dead. Now the rest of the dead can be raised because his sacrifice, death, burial, and resurrection is now acceptable to the Lord. And that's why we can be raised from the dead. As in Adam all die, so the Messiah will be raised and made alive, but each in his own order. Moshiach, or Messiah, the first fruits. After that, those who are Moshiachs at his coming. He had to rise first so that the rest of us could be raised in the proper order, just like the barley, I covered that already, had to be offered to the Lord first before the rest of the new harvest. Let me just make sure I'm getting all these things right, because I do mess up on this. 1 second, please. I always mess up somehow or another on my notes. All right. He had to rise first so the rest of us could be raised in proper order. I already said that. Okay. Just like the barley had to be offered to the Lord first before the rest of the new harvest could be eaten, this day was a prototype, a foreshadow of the Lord's resurrection. He is the first fruits of the barley harvest. We are the rest of the harvest after the offering. Yeshua was presented to the Father as a perfect offering of first fruits, of course, resurrected from the dead. Now the rest of us, the rest of the harvest, that's us, can be presented to the Father in its proper order. All right, hopefully you've understood that and I haven't confused you. All right, now, all right. So to sum it all up again, Yeshua was slain on the tree on the eve of the Passover, the 14th of Aviv, at twilight, as the sun is going down. There's a time in the Jewish calendar where it's not quite night, it's not quite day, the sun is going down. It's called twilight, in between the evenings. And he arose from the grave 3 days and 3 nights. It had to be, and I'll read you those passages. The next podcast, we will cover those passages about 3 days and 3 nights. I'm going to try and do this in segments so I don't wear you out. 3 days and 3 nights he was slain. Yeshua rose from the grave on the 17th of Aviv, the day, the festival of first fruits. And again, work back and count 3 days and 3 nights from first fruits, and you have Wednesday. You don't have Friday. And we don't have this partial day theory that they talk about, whatever part of the day was in there. Hi, Michael Citroniti. So good to see your name. I sure wish you were visiting us from South Africa. We miss you. Or you can text me, or you can Skype with me sometime. At least I'll see your face. All right. So he rises from the grave on the 17th of Aviv, the day of the festival of first fruits. This day would be the day after the weekly Sabbath during the week of Passover, 3 days and 3 nights in the earth. And then the prophecy is fulfilled. It's good. I like it. That's a good plan. And unfortunately, I'll make this quick, and before I end, the problem is Easter celebrates the Constantinian construct. And I'm not going to quote this verbatim. It's close because it's a very long passage. Constantine, 325 AD, basically says, let us now separate ourselves from the heinous practices of the Jews, those odious people. And he says, we will celebrate the resurrection on a more perfect way. I'm paraphrasing. And he now sets the date of the resurrection on the first Sunday after the full moon of the spring equinox. It has nothing to do with the Passover. It has nothing to do with first fruits or the resurrection. The reason why he did that is because he was an amazing politician. He was a dictator, and he was a Roman king, but he wasn't a nice guy. I wouldn't want to have him over for dinner. Come have some matzo ball soup and enjoy Passover with me. But he was a great politician, and he knew how to appease his people. So what does he do? He tries to unite the Western Church and the Eastern Church. Of course, the Eastern Church, there was a split, the Eastern Orthodox groups, etc., etc. And he wants to have them all celebrate the resurrection on the same day. So what does he do? He puts it after on the Sunday after the full moon of the spring equinox, which coincidentally coincides with the pagan festival of Ishtar, which we'll talk about as well, the pagan goddess of fertility. Now, I know that, did I say South Africa? Oh, it's Australia. Yes, Michael, I get that now. Thanks. And what do you want from me? I don't know. So that's problematic, because if you're celebrating on a Friday, that he died on a Friday afternoon and rose on a Sunday, you're literally invalidating the prophecy. You're basically saying to the Lord, thanks for the prophecy. Thanks for letting us know that we can prove the resurrection based upon prophetic display. You've put so much into this, but we don't need that. We'll make it up as we go along. Constantine was good enough for us. No, doesn't work that way. We obey the Lord's word. You all remember very clearly that King Saul was rebuked by the prophet Samuel because he didn't obey. He would not kill Agag, the king of the Amalekites. He would not do what he was told to do. And he spared the best of the animals for sacrifice, and then said, oh, the people, they did it. It wasn't me. I didn't do nothing. I'm a nice guy. And he blames the people. Not good. To obey, he says, is better than sacrifice. It's not about salvation. I say it again. I'm not condemning you to the fiery furnace, but I am telling you the resurrection loses its power when it's taken out of the context of the biblical prophetic display, and no one can tell me different. And you cannot tell me it's your good intention. Good intentions don't cut it. It's obeying the word of the Lord. Am I wrong? What does he say in the book of James? Faith without works is dead. And I see I got a nice glare along my face from the window. Just so you'll know, that's because I'm glowing. I'm manifesting the glory, at least of the window, if nothing else. So Yeshua was raised on the third day. That's all you can say about that. I will say one more thing in closing, and hopefully I'll figure out how to end this broadcast and not make you people have to suffer through my face too much longer. The one thing, the Jewish calendar, the modern Jewish calendar, is set up in a way where, and it came out of the Babylonian captivity, and I always get this mixed up, so forgive me if I'm wrong. It's a 17-year cycle where 9 times split up throughout the 17 years, there is a leap month called Second Adar, okay? And this allows the Passover to always be brought back to the spring, so it never gets continually moved. And they got this out of the Babylonian calendar. This is why the months, Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz, Av, Elul, Tishri, Cheshvan, Kislev, Tevet, Shevat, Adar, one of the months is called Tammuz, who is the son of Nimrod. because when they were in Babylon, they could not look for the Aviv barley. And I understand, and they had to have a calendar. That's fine. But now we're in Israel, and now we can look for the Aviv barley, and now we can get back to the biblical calendar. Because you could always predict when Passover was coming years, centuries in advance based upon the Babylonian calendar. With the Hebrew calendar, you cannot make a prediction of when Passover will come until you see the Aviv barley. You have to wait every year for the Aviv barley. This is off my notes. I'm just kind of explaining this to you. So in the spring, we look for the harvest of the barley. We look, it's coming up, it's looking good. The signs of the times show clearly that spring is here. Now we have to continually look for the signs of the times so that when we see the Aviv barley, now we can set the date, but only because we've observed the signs of the times. And that means every year for the Passover, which represents his coming, we need to be willing to disturb our schedule for him. So every year without fail, we need to be watching and looking for his coming, just as we had to do the first time when he came, when we weren't there, but the Talmudim, the disciples, had to look and know the prophecies. And even then, they didn't fully understand until after he was risen. But we must look for the signs of the times. Again, for them, it was the Aviv barley. Then we set the Rosh Chodesh, but every year we couldn't determine. We had to always be watchful, just like the 10 virgins. 5 of them had their lamps and their, I almost called their wicks, I'll get it right. They had their lamps with their wicks trimmed in the oil, and the 5 of them didn't have oil and didn't have their wicks trimmed. We must be like the 10 virgins, prepared for his coming. Just as we will in his second coming, we look for the signs of the times. We need to stop trying to set dates and speculate about his coming. We don't know. What does Yeshua say in Matthew 24? No man knows the day or the hour. I tell you, end time prophecy, it's big business. You can make a lot of money off of it. I've got a prediction for you. He's coming. Yes, that's all I can say. But I look for the signs of the times. And then sometimes I don't even know until after they've happened. Stop making predictions. I, personally, me, Henry, believe we are in the birth pangs of Matthew 24. It's going to get a lot worse, it says in the book of Matthew. It's going to get a lot worse. It's all I can tell you. And I could be wrong, but I'm of that persuasion. I'm not of that persuasion. But I'll tell you one thing. I'm looking for the signs of the times. Just as Passover was a prototype of his first coming, and just as it is a prototype of things to come, the Aviv barley, everything fits. Everything is interconnected. The Lord doesn't throw these things out and just mitten drin and helter-skelter just so that we'll have something to do. And when the body of believers, those who call themselves believers, are willing to invest in the word of the Lord and see the incredible blessing of the word of the Lord in this prophetic display, they'll always have a weak apologetic. I hope this has blessed you. I know that I get long-winded. I'm going to try my best to, the next time I do this, make it a little shorter. I'll do this in increments. Let's see, tomorrow I have to do some things in the morning. I'll try and get back in the afternoon before Bible study here and do another one. I'm not going to schedule anything because I got a full day this week getting ready for Passover. But if you see me online, or I will try and save this and you can go over these notes again, at least you'll have them. And if you want to shoot me a letter, an email, or a pigeon, send a pigeon with a carrier, a letter on it, at Benafucci, BENAFUCHI at AOL.com. BENAFUCHI at AOL.com. And if I can answer your questions, I will. And be my blessing to help you grow close in your faith to the Lord, having a greater apologetic, understanding his word, serving him with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and becoming the man that the Lord, or woman that the Lord has called you to be. Thanks for listening. I think this was a pretty good experiment. I hope. Was it okay, guys? Any response? Did it work out okay? All right, I don't see any response. So hopefully it was good. Blessings on you all. I'm ending broadcast. This is Rabbi Henry ending broadcast right now. I think I ended. No, maybe not. I'll try it again. Oops.